Good morning, everybody. My name's Brianna May, and this is my podcast where today we'll be talking about homelessness and families. Today I'm bringing in my father, who's the Director of Student Services at Franklin County Technical School. So, Dad, what does it mean to be the Director of Student Services at Franklin County Tech, and how do you see your work relating to homelessness?
Well, that's a great question. So, Director of Student Services is a catch-all title for a number of things. Primarily, I deal with special education, Title I. I'm the Director of Guidance, Nursing Services, and also Counseling Services. But under that umbrella is this thing that I'm in charge of. It's called McKinney-Vento, and/or I am the Homeless Foster Care Liaison. The McKinney-Vento Act is an act that talks about providing services in the state of Massachusetts for homeless children, really, because that's what I deal with predominantly, but we're a community, so families are involved as well. In my role, what I have to do is, in the school setting, I identify students who may or may not be homeless. If they are homeless, then I run a very quick questionnaire for them. I meet with them. We have a briefing about services that they might need in the immediate or things that they might need in the future. There are some things that the state of Massachusetts offers to students who attend K through 12 institutions. And then our school, as most schools do, has a little bit of a safety net that's available to families as well. The next part of that is I then have to report that student to the state of Massachusetts, and they're tracked in a large database that I put in my piece, and every other school district, there's about 363 of them, also track their students who are homeless and or in foster care. Sometimes those things are synonymous. Many times they're not, though. The homeless piece is run through, generated to the state, and then we maintain an ongoing database, and we have meetings. So that's kind of the logistical role that I fill.
Very good. How do you see homelessness and families affecting other areas of these kids' life you work with, like their education or how they interact socially and emotionally with other students? Like, do you see higher dropout rates?
Yeah. That's another good question, and this is a complex issue. Mm-hmm. So homelessness is not a permanent state for a lot of families. We live in Franklin County. Franklin County is, if not the poorest, certainly very near the top if you were looking at poorest counties in the state of Massachusetts. It's also very rural, so there's some challenges with rural housing too. But where it affects kids, and that's my predominant focus, is it does impact them. You know, they need to get to school. In order for you to get to school, you need to be fed. You have to have clean clothes. There are lots of things that certain kids and families take for granted, like having access to washing machines and dryers, having access to food sources that are affordable and within kind of the scope. So there are a number of things. That all then affects attendance for kids at school. We always want to take care of those basic needs. Sometimes they're not always basic. Clothing, food, shelter. Shelter is the common issue. But we need students to attend school, one, because it's good for their future, and two, in the immediate, that's the place or the hub that the social service network actually exists in. So I would say attendance is the largest impact. And then all the pieces that go with that. There are some social components around that, how students and other students interpret relationships with kids who are homeless. You don't have a place to bring friends over to. Sometimes you don't feel comfortable going over to friends' houses. There are difficulties getting to extracurricular activities because many times when parents or families don't have housing, they also have limited access to transportation. And again, in Franklin County, public transportation is at a premium. There's not a lot of it, and it's not particularly robust, what there is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're working with these kids, is there a lot of talk back with, like, their adults that are in this situation, their parents, and if you're working with kids in foster care that are in these situations, do you get a lot of communication with adults?
So those are two strands, right? You've got the foster system, which there's a lot of communication because those students have foster parents, DCF workers. Sometimes they have what are called guardian ad litems. Those are typically retired or pro bono lawyers who represent those students in court cases. So for foster kids, there's systems oversight. They still lack some of the other pieces that kids who are homeless with their families have, just having a family structure. But that's the foster piece. Now for the homeless piece, it's an interesting kind of discussion you bring, because homeless isn't always homeless, right? We have students who you would see where mom and dad or mom and dad both lose a job, and so they are homeless, but they are a family unit. That's one version. There are actually a number of designations in that state system I talked to you about. The first thing you have to ask is, thing you're asked is the student an unaccompanied minor? Right? So does that mean that they're a full family unit, or does that mean that that student has, for some reason, been kicked out of their house, had some situation where the parents moved out of state and they're left alone, or they are staying with a relative? Good, yep. So if they're unaccompanied, then there's really nobody to talk to, and sometimes we turn those kids over to DCF through a separate process, and they become foster students.
So the government's really honed in and kind of...
I wouldn't say they're honed in. The government's rarely honed in on anything, quite frankly. But this is the setup that we have and the systems of support, and they are what they are. I mean, they've got their positives and they have their negatives. The other group that you will see often in high schools, whereas where I do most of my work, is kids who turn 18 or kids who are 17 who have an argument with their family or just don't get along with their family structure, and they leave. And they live with boyfriends and boyfriends' families, or they live with an aunt who they get along with. So your original question is, do I communicate with those kids?
And does that count as homeless?
It does count as homeless. If you, for instance, and I had a big fight and you ran out and you were away from my house for a period of time, then it would be whoever's in my role at your school to determine whether or not you are homeless. Okay. And I would call the parent and say, look, Brianna I've met with her. She admits that she's living with a friend, and I'm checking to make sure that you know that's the case. And sometimes parents say, no, it's not the case. She can come home whenever she wants. Sometimes parents say, yep, I kicked her out and I don't want her back home. Each one has a different response. We try to communicate really to establish the truth and whether the student's homeless or not. And then what kind of structures and supports there are. So really the two big supports that schools provide is, if you are homeless, you are guaranteed transportation to school. So we've had students who are homeless and they've moved to Springfield and doubled. It's called doubling up. It's another term that's used in McKinney-Vento. That means they've doubled up with another family, or they're living with grandma who has a house in Springfield. Well, Springfield's 60 miles away. Yeah. I have to secure transportation, so we make sure that student has a ride to and from school. That's no small feat. The other piece is we make sure students have lunch and breakfast. That's become easier because the federal government has actually, since COVID, underwritten school lunch programs. And so all students are free, and we're reimbursed. And that's a very nice benefit for the schools. It also makes feeding kids who are either undernourished, or parents are underemployed, or in this case homeless, it's just an easier way to get food to kids because we know that we will be reimbursed for that. But yes, I call parents, I call grandparents, I spend a lot of time on the phone, sometimes with DCF or other social service agencies, making sure that students have as many supports as possible, and we're providing that kind of information to each other.
Got it. Thank you. Statistics from the National Coalition for Homelessness this year, or last year in 2024, found that across America, roughly 60,000 families are homeless, meaning that the total homeless population is 771,480 people, and out of that, homeless families make up 57,563 families that live in homelessness. But in Massachusetts, what are those numbers? Or at least
I don't know what
County.
the state numbers are, and I don't know what the Franklin County numbers are. What I can tell you is Massachusetts has a kind of a robust law on the books that guarantees homeless Massachusetts residents housing. And we are struggling with that. It's become more of a problem with some people who've moved in. You can imagine if you're in a state that doesn't have that guaranteed housing, like Vermont or New Hampshire or Connecticut, and you're in a border state, then you come into Massachusetts and you begin to get involved with the social service agencies here. There's some talk about how that might need to be adjusted, but what I can say is it is less than, off the top of my head, we have about 650 students. We probably have anywhere at any one time 10 to 12 students who would qualify as homeless.
Okay.
Sometimes those are siblings, right? So when you talk about family dynamics, if you have multiple kids in the family, that's just what it is. So what's that? 10 out of 650? Like 10% would be 60, 1% would be 6. So we're a little over 1%. You know, I'd say 1% of our population is homeless at any one time. And again, as I said, that fluctuates, right? Some kids, it's a transient population. That's part of the ugliness, because once you think that you've got things taken care of, somebody else pops up. Yeah. And as I said, Franklin County is one of the poorer areas in Massachusetts. That leads to two problems. There's not a lot of solid jobs, and that includes service industry jobs, which sometimes pay less.
And that's how you get into the cycle of poverty and loss of jobs. And then,
but that also leads to a crush in the housing market. Their rentals are extremely expensive when correlated to salaries in Franklin County. I think and when you talk about families, you need multiple bedrooms. That's sometimes you'll have kids and families who live in the hotel on 10 in Bernardston as a transient place for a while, or because it's Franklin County as the whole region, we have families living in the Econo Lodge off Route 2 in Orange, right? But those are not sustainable. Those are one-room situations.
Do you think being in a rural area like Franklin County factors into not having enough resources? Like, we don't have a lot of homeless shelters around here, or so you find a lot of people live in cars and hotels, like you said.
Really what you find around here, and to answer the whole question, yes. The fact that this is a rural area, that there are not a lot of social services spread out, right? There are a number in Orange that has a small social service network connected to the Orange Courthouse, and then you have Greenfield. The Franklin County is about 75,000 people, last I knew. Greenfield is about 15. Orange is about 10. That means you've got 42,000 people, 40 to 42,000 people spread throughout the hill towns. And in order to kind of get support in any social service situation, homeless or otherwise, they've got to get to Greenfield or Orange. Now, if you live in Charlemont, that's a 10, 12-mile trip.
Yeah.
And there's no mass transit. So what does that mean? That means that not a lot of people are living in their cars. Not a lot of people are living in shelters because there aren't that many, and what there are, they're not that high quality.
Yeah.
What it means is people double up a lot. You'll have people who live with an aunt or an uncle or
just kind of
a grandfather.
Hop around from place to place.
Yeah. Back in the day when I was a kid, and I'm sure it's still an applicable term, it was called couch surfing.
Yeah.
So if you're an 18-year-old kid, you got kicked out of your house, you couch surfed for a year. And I had friends when I was growing up who found themselves in those situations, right?
Do you find that a big reason for the homelessness that you witness has to do with, like you talked about, job loss and job scarcity, but do you find things like domestic violence or stuff like that having to do with homelessness that you see a lot?
So there is some job loss and some job scarcity. A lot of ours comes from broken down family structures where kids don't want to live at home anymore. Parents are tired of constant battles and kids move out. What you're talking about in terms of domestic violence, I don't see a lot firsthand. And if I do see domestic violence firsthand, I have to follow a protocol called a 51A, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a 51A is I'm called a mandated reporter. So if I think that a student has had something happen to them, where a parent has struck them or they've been abused, so there's abuse, neglect, and sexual abuse are the big three. And if it's abuse and they were struck, then I have to call Department of Children and Families. And they go through a process to either substantiate or not substantiate a claim. And they do an investigation.
Okay.
If an investigation is substantiated, most of those kids are taken out of the house. And then they are placed in temporary foster care.
Okay.
So, by definition, they're homeless, but they're placed in a foster care system. And then they go through the Department of Children and Families. So I do not see a lot of direct interaction of domestic violence leading to homelessness of women and children or other family members, but typically that. Now, I do have families, anecdotally, who have left and moved into this area because it's a cheap area to live. Who are running from things, and they've shared those stories with me, but nothing that I'm directly involved in.
Got it. Well, I think we're about out of time, so thank you. I appreciate our talk.
Oh, fantastic. If I can say, this was a really powerful topic. It's hard to get to.
Yeah.
It brings up a lot of stuff, and I really think I'm proud of you, and I congratulate you for trying to bring this forward.
Thank you.